Just a short welcome in my people's custom. Greetings to the Onondaga Nation, the President of the General Assembly, Madam Chairperson of the Permanent Forum, distinguished panelists, respected Indigenous representatives, Forum delegates, and the Voluntary Fund for enabling my participation. Māori are very familiar with commemoration, so first I want to offer what is in Māori custom the usual short story to set the scene. The most famous commemorations for Māori of which is one that happens every February the 6th, the anniversary of the signing in 1840 between Māori chiefs and the Crown of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, New Zealand's founding document. Those familiar with our Tiriti commemorations will know full well that they are more than just a feel-good occasion. There is always, without exception, robust discussion, as there are still many unresolved Māori grievances associated with the Crown's Tiriti violations. And this year we saw unprecedented strong words between Māori leaders and New Zealand government officials. It's the first time that Māori have publicly declared the New Zealand government with its extraordinary anti-treaty policies to be, and I quote, our enemy. So the good news? This has galvanised Māori from all over Aotearoa to collaboratively focus even more intently on reconstructing Māori sovereignty. So how does this all relate to the outcome document's 10th anniversary? Well, let's consider some harsh realities expressed in this forum's opening session about SDG progress which has stalled and in some cases reversed. A crumbling Western system founded on greed and green neo-imperialism and destructive capitalistic forces which are catastrophic for the earth. These have all profoundly negative impacts on Indigenous people's human rights, despite states in the outcome document reaffirming the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and committing to giving due consideration to recommendations and advice issued by the Permanent Forum and the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Simultaneously, there is a growing recognition that the UN system more broadly is becoming increasingly captured by pathological corporate agendas that are harmful to Indigenous people's rights and well-being. From the 2019 UN partnership with the World Economic Forum to accelerate the 2030 agenda, to fossil fuel companies' domination of the UNFCCC Conference of Parties, or big agriculture's influence over the Food and Agriculture Organization, to big farmers' control over the UN World Health Organization, most notably its CA Plus proposal, formerly known as a pandemic treaty, which may have identified another mechanism for grabbing of Indigenous people's lands and basically a sovereignty steal. In short, the optics from an Indigenous perspective, arguably, are that the UN is becoming increasingly fascistic, if we are to accept the definition of fascism as a marriage between corporations and the governing body. So, 10 years on from the adoption of the outcome document, what I see is the UN suffering a crisis of Indigenous people's mistrust. And not just the mechanisms mandated with promoting and protecting Indigenous people's human rights, but across the entire UN system itself. For generations, Indigenous peoples have experienced comparatively small, incremental advances in realizing our human rights, while corporations are given free rein with advancing their suicidal agendas of further enslaving humanity and murdering our Mother Earth. Net zero definitely does not apply in this equation. Such an abusive relationship between sovereign Indigenous peoples and the UN is untenable. Our life-nurturing traditional values are incompatible with such violence in interpersonal relationships, so why tolerate it elsewhere? Therefore, I emphasize with calls and empathize an Indigenous people's rahui, that is a restriction or boycott of the UN and or selected agencies and mechanisms, simultaneous with an urgent unionization of Indigenous peoples, dealing respectfully with one another as sovereign First Nations, focusing on our life-nurturing priorities. My challenge to the UN, this feels more like a funeral than a commemoration, I'm sorry, but it does, is to urgently course correct, go back to your human rights roots and purge life-destroying corruption from your system. And to my Indigenous relatives, I leave the final word to the representative of the Plurinational State of Bolivia from Monday's forum opening, who said, "It is time to use our wings to fly." Nā reira, mauri ora, thank you.